Welcome to another episode of Interviews from the Crypt. I'm Adam Holtzaffel. Joining us today is the writer, co-writer, and director of the new Shudder original film Slaxx, Elza Kephart. Thank you for joining us today, Elza. How's it going?
Oh, my pleasure. It's going well. It's so nice to be talking about Slaxx.
Yeah, no, just to kind of start out, how did the idea for Slaxx come about, and what changes did it go through to get to the final product?
The original idea came when co-writer Patricia Gomez-Latar and I were on a super long road trip between Gainesville and New Orleans with another friend of ours. And we'd all been friends for a super long time, and we were just like loving teasing each other with things you would on a road trip, like the words you hate. So my friend hates the word slacks, and so Patricia and I would just tease her going slacks, 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 slacks over and over, and it naturally became an idea for a film about killer pants. That's literally how it came about. And then at first it was set in a high school, like a typical sort of cheesy high school slasher movie, but it didn't, no pun intended, it didn't have any legs. Because it was just very one note, and something we'd seen before. And then Patricia suggested we weave in her retail experience. She'd worked at the Gap, so we did another draft that worked much better, but still there was something lacking, like there was a heart to it that wasn't there. And then when we turned to finally doing the final draft that has become Slaxx, we knew that we had to give the character of Slaxx a sort of humanity. And so when we decided to make her be a child laborer, and I'm not revealing anything, oh no, so that's when the film really came to life, because we had a heart to it, and we had a good third act where we find out where she's from, why she's doing this. And so it took 3 drafts over 20 years. So that's what I like to say, but it didn't take literally 20 years to write.
And in addition to kind of child labor aspect, I kind of felt there was a little classism aspect with Romaine Denny's character, where not to reveal too much, but when she started her job at the store, she had last season's clothing, and was that kind of an aspect you want to add to the film as well?
I would say classism so much because, as her employee says, last season was 3 weeks ago. So
right,
she's like a typical teen who would maybe buy clothes 2 or 3 times a year. But it was definitely a comment on just the insanity of fast fashion.
Yeah, and speaking of Romaine, how did the casting go about? I know, being in the United States, these are a lot of fresh faces for the audience here.
We went to a casting director who was really great, a Quebec casting director. So he suggested, I mean, as casting usually goes, he sent out a casting call, and then we got all these suggestions. And Romane was quite a surprise, because she's French Canadian, and I didn't realize that she was perfectly bilingual. I had seen her before, and I just knew her as a francophone. And so we had tried to really find a Libby at first in English Canada, but when her audition tape came, I was just really blown away by how little she had to do to get us to care for her. And then when it turned out that she was perfectly bilingual, to me, there was no question in my mind. And we were trying to find someone with a little bit of a name for the Craig character, but that didn't come about. And so around 10 days or so, or 2 weeks maybe before the start of the shoot, we still didn't have a Craig. So we again put a mad, frantic call for a casting call for that character, and Brett just came in with a self-tape and just blew me away. He was the only person who really nailed Craig, and all the other actors came just through self-tapes and stuff like that. So we're really happy and lucky to find such a great cast.
Yeah, and the cast seemed to work well together. Were there any kind of hiccups you had along the way during the filming?
For casting wise, no, everyone was great. I have to say, it was the cast were a real pleasure to work with, and I'm not just saying that to be nice. They were really like, knowing I would go into work and see all these awesome actors to work with really would help me actually get through really difficult parts. I think the most difficult parts were the special effects kills, because we had so many elements. We had the puppets of the pants, then we had the blood, and we had the actors. So just to maneuver all these, and then we sometimes we had to have keep in mind VFX at the same time in one shot, and so like Lord's death scene was just so hard. I think it took a day and a half to shoot, and it was the most difficult scene to shoot and the most difficult scene to edit. So those were the, I wouldn't say necessarily hiccups, but because, you know, it's hard to shoot a practical effects scene with flying pants and blood and stuff. But that was definitely the hardest thing. And I'd never done this before. So I'd never done stunts or anything like that. Like VFX, I had no idea. I mean, I knew how it worked, but I had never done it on my own film. So it's a big learning curve.
Yeah, and speaking of the practical effects, did you ever think of maybe going CGI for the pants, or was it
No,
not an option?
no, I really wanted to go practical. You know, I grew up watching awesome films from the 80s and 90s, and I do really believe that if it's shot in camera, our eye treats it differently than if it's incorporated after. And I think someone actually, an interviewer today, said something really interesting, is that um, sure, practical effects can look a bit dated, but there's a truth to them that remains, and CGI is quickly updated so quickly that something that was shot 5 years ago really quickly looks old, but some practical effects that was shot 50 years ago still has this like weird magical quality to it. So I think in the back of my mind, that's something that I really wanted to capture.
Yeah, and to discuss the setting a little bit, the retail store, I know any of us that have worked retail can kind of relate to that. But it also kind of felt like Dawn of the Dead in a way, where the employees were more the robotic zombies than the Slaxx. And I was wondering if that's kind of something you want to convey when filming Slaxx.
For sure. Well, really, what I mean, I love Donna. That's awesome. That's an awesome reference. What I really wanted for people to get is that the corporation is the real monster, and Slaxx,
Right.
albeit a killer, is not the real monster. Um, the like Harold Lansgrove is the one who should die, and sadly,
Right.
like a lot of corporate heads, he's not going to be punished for his evil sins. Maybe in Slaxx too. No, I'm joking. There won't be a Slaxx.
I don't think fans would be mad if there was, though, but yeah. And now this premieres on Shudder on March 18th. How did you kind of get on their radar and kind of get to work with them on this project?
It was through our executive producer, Shaked Benson, who runs Horror Collective and Entertainment Squad. So he came on board because he knew our producer, Anne-Marie Gélina, and then he brought Shudder on board.
Okay, cool. And I want to thank you for taking the time today to chat about Slaxx. It's been a real pleasure and can't wait to see what you do next.
You bet. Thank you so much.